Today is World AIDS Day, which is an international day to raise awareness of human immunodeficiency virus and the condition acquired immune deficiency syndrome. There are a lot of stigmas and misunderstandings around HIV/AIDS, including a very large portion of the British population believing if they're straight, they cannot contact HIV at all. So I just wanted to create this video to tackle some of those stigmas, help raise awareness, and just go over the history of the disease as well. HIV is a virus, specifically a retrovirus, which spreads through bodily fluids. This can include semen and vaginal fluids, including all forms of sexual acts that it can exchange through, including fellatio. Coming into contact with the blood of an infected person can also cause you to contract the virus. So that could be through drug users sharing needles, for example, and even ways such as ingesting the breast milk of an infected person can also cause yourself to be infected. In the UK, there was also an infected blood crisis, which means if you had a blood transfusion or received blood-based products before 1996, then you could also have been infected with HIV-positive blood that way as well. After infection, there is typically an onset of around 2 to 6 weeks, which is where you appear to have a very bad flu and have flu-like symptoms. These symptoms then disappear, and HIV can go into a latent form for many years after that, and you might have just thought, oh, maybe you just had a really bad flu, but it's a lot more serious than that. Because whilst this is going on, whilst those symptoms disappear, the virus is infecting your white blood cells, which are called CD4 cells specifically. The virus does this by fusing to the cell membrane, so the outside bit of the cell, if we imagine this is the cell, it fuses onto the end of it just like that, and then the virus releases the genetic codes, the viral RNA it's called, into the cell, and these are like blueprints for your cell to produce different proteins. Your body, obviously your cells have DNA and RNA of yourself as well to make your own proteins, but what these proteins from the virus do is they travel to the nucleus where your DNA is stored into the cell, and then from there it starts to cause the cell, instead of to produce its own proteins for your human body, instead to produce the proteins for the virus, specifically the proteins to make viral particles. So this genetic code basically infiltrates your cell's own genetic code there and where it's stored to then tell the cell to produce more of the viruses. So infect a cell at a time doing this there to cause the virus particles to be made. And then when enough of these particles have been made through the proteins, again from the machinery of your cells, they're producing the viruses. What then happens is the viruses relieve each cell to then target and infect more of the CD4 cells. So that will, whilst leaving the cells, it will kill the CD4 cells, and that then leads to a full of white blood cells ultimately in your body, of course. And if in case you don't remember from secondary school maybe, or A-levels or whatever, it's these white blood cells that basically make up your immune system. So as HIV is infecting your cells, causing it to make more of the virus and then killing these cells, that's causing your CD, lymphocyte or white blood cell count to drop, and eventually that will then cause your immune system to stop working altogether. And at that stage, we would say that you have acquired immune deficiency syndrome. After acquiring AIDS, or again, acquired immune deficiency syndrome at this point, it's not the AIDS that kills you, it's then opportunistic infections which take advantage of you virtually having no immune system to then infect you. And again, these are normally diseases or viruses or bacteria in the world that wouldn't normally affect you because your immune system would just get rid of it. But instead, that you do get infected because your immune system's been damaged, and they just wreak havoc across your body, and you'll then die from things such as pneumonia, for example. Thankfully, AIDS isn't the death sentence that it did used to be. Testing is available to make sure if you are HIV positive, you can access medication called antiretrovirals that stop the virus from replicating and destroying your immune system, so that can then repair itself and you never do develop AIDS. when on this medication, your HIV viral load will start to decrease as well, because again, it stops the virus essentially from being able to kill your cells and make more of the virus. So that means your viral load or count of HIV particles would decrease. And that means also that your condition, your HIV, can be suppressed so that you're not able to pass this condition to anyone else as well. So it really is important to get tested, and if you do happen to be HIV positive, to seek help, because it's, rather than waiting for it to become AIDS, it's hugely beneficial, of course, to catch it early on and stop it from getting to that deadly point. Preventative care is also rapidly developing. So many countries, including the UK, have needle exchange initiatives to help prevent needle sharing. It's incredibly easy to practice safe sex to prevent infection through the accessibility of condoms, for example. And there are also medications called PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis, which prevents the HIV virus from infecting your cells after exposure to the virus. And there's also a type of medication called PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. And what that does is it just means that you could have an encounter with someone who is HIV positive and they are able to pass this on to you. But when you take PEP, or if you've already taken PrEP, it just limits the virus's ability to infect your cells, so that after that initial exposure, you would hopefully never actually take on the virus at all, and it would just leave your system. A large part of World AIDS Day is to raise awareness about these medications, which do require additional research and also funding to get them available to vulnerable people across the world, as well as to encourage people to get tested, which helps to catch anyone who may have been exposed years ago so that they can be monitored and again just avoid developing AIDS. HIV is believed to have crossed the species barrier between chimpanzees and humans as early as the 1930s. Researchers of HIV have studied old blood samples as early back as 1959 from a man in the Congo region of Africa, which had HIV virus particles present in his blood. A huge stigma that first needs to be tackled is how this crossover happened. It was common growing up as a young kid in primary school to hear stories about men, and sometimes it'd be specified to gay men because of other stigmas, having intercourse with monkeys or chimps to infect humans. And this is not true at all. Remember, any bodily fluid, that including blood contact, can cause someone to be infected, and that's how it happened. In Africa, the trade of bushmeat and practice of hunting animals, including chimpanzees for meat, has been going on for centuries. During this time, hunters would be constantly exposed to the blood of hunted animals, and old world primates, we call them, like chimpanzees, have a virus called simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, which infects wild primates and would have been present in their blood, that again hunters would have been in contact with daily, and it could have been getting into their mouths, for example, or any wounds whilst hunting as well. And with viruses, they do mutate incredibly quickly. So a mutation is a random change in the genetic code of a viral particle in this instance, which can then cause changes in proteins being made. And it would have been in a mutation that allowed viral particles of SIV to infect the cells of humans. These then got picked up from the blood of hunters for bushmeat, and that would have then passed on mutated SIV particles to a human population. So the process of a virus or bacteria or parasite which could once not infect humans but now can through random mutation is called zoonosis, and this is also the origin of diseases such as the Ebola virus, swine flu causing viruses, and salmonella as well. So it's not too uncommon, and again it's not heard about that much, which of course is why there's that stigma around men and whatever they were doing to monkeys, of course. That does cause that to be picked up, but it's not the case at all there. It does happen regularly. Humans, of course, have been around closely animals for a very long time now, for example, cattle, and that can cause swine flu, of course, to cross over, and it's just happening randomly all of the time there, that diseases are crossing the barrier between animals and then into humans humans. It happens the other way around too, as well sometimes. That's called reverse zoonosis there, where something that could only infect humans can then infect animals. I believe that happened at one point actually with COVID-19. I think there was a mutation in COVID-19 which allowed it to infect cats. I think it was that way around. It could have been the other way around, but there was some sort of swap around there that was picked up during the pandemic. But it's just not something that is heard about enough, which again causes those stigmas. In 1981, HIV was first observed in humans in America. However, again, blood samples do indicate that the disease was around a lot longer than that, and it could have been propagating in America as early as in the 70s or the 60s even. In 1981, this was when 5 previously fit and healthy gay men in Los Angeles presented themselves with having a very rare form of pneumonia. And it was also noted that these men had other strange and unusual infections, which indicated that their immune system was not working. The UK had its first cases as well in 1982, which was in London, and from there publications spread across gay and lesbian communities in San Francisco and New York, talking of a gay pneumonia, it was called, or a gay man's cancer, and seeked others to see specialists if they were feeling unwell, especially with feeling breathlessness. At that same time, so in 1981 still, a paediatrician in New York noticed that a small number of children of sex workers seemed to have the same immune system deficiency to the problems that were being observed in gay communities. However, that was dismissed by colleagues that was the same disease, the same virus at that time. By the end of 1981, America had already 130 deaths related to AIDS, with 321 adults and 16 children being recorded as HIV positive. Going further into the 1980s now, the epidemic did start to take hold, this time with a new name known as GRID, or gay-related immunodeficiency. Cases by 1983 had already risen to be in their thousands. Bathhouses were closing, children with HIV were being banned from attending school, and fear and hysteria were starting to take hold. Provisions were starting to be taken to prevent the spread of HIV, including a full ban on gay men being able to donate blood. However, there were many opportunities missed. Due to the USA's war on drugs, needle exchange programs were not funded by the government, and it is estimated almost 10,000 deaths could have been prevented if this was not resisted. Into the late 1980s, there were a handful of celebrities who had succumbed to the disease, including Freddie Mercury in 1991. Princess Diana also made headlines when she shook hands with a HIV-positive person. In 1988, the world's first AIDS Day was held, supported by the United Nations to encourage other nations across the world to get involved to tackle the disease. And all of this did help to garner sympathy around the disease to help improve treatment and prevention. In 1994, the United Kingdom had the peak number of deaths related to AIDS, which was 1,531. In 1996, at an AIDS conference in Vancouver, in British Columbia, it was discussed to take a combination of at least 3 different antiretrovirals a day. This soon became the standard practice across the world, which led to a sharp decline of deaths due to AIDS. However, the number of HIV transmissions continued to climb, and this was because whilst a lot of people that were HIV positive were taking this medication to help prevent it being developed into AIDS there, it wasn't enough to be able to prevent transmission there. It wasn't enough of these people taking the antiretrovirals to suppress their HIV so that they weren't able to pass it on to other partners. It wasn't until the 2010s actually that this number started to seriously increase in the number of people taking antiretrovirals in the UK to prevent infection to others, and it wasn't until between 2015 to 2020 that there was then a subsequent fall in a number of new infections and new transmissions. It wasn't until in 2017 that the UK finally reached the United Nations AIDS Programme target of having over 90% of HIV positive people diagnosed, so they were aware of their condition, 90% of HIV positive people on antiretroviral treatments, and then 19% of people positive for HIV taking this medication so that their HIV was virtually suppressed, meaning it was then untransmissible. So this means that whilst there is now over 40-year-long a history of the disease, it's still not stuck in the past. It's a very much ongoing endeavour to be able to prevent new infections, not just to tackle deaths and infection around the world, but still in developed countries such as the UK and America. It's estimated that right now in the UK there are as many as 5,000 individuals who do not know that they have HIV, and these are people that are being able to potentially be passing it on to other partners, and they're not able to stop the virus from accumulating, for the load to increase and for it to develop into AIDS possibly before it's too late as well, and to protect their quality of life. This cannot be thought of as a bygone era. It is important to test yourself and seek preventative care and practices such as, again, safe sex. HIV positive individuals can face discrimination in a number of ways. This goes back to the 80s when, again, children were banned from attending school due to their infection. However, this does still take place to this day in workplaces, in accessing healthcare. For example, if a GP refuses to take you on as a patient due to your infection and care needs, and in social spaces as well, due to the stigmatisation of people with HIV and the moral judgment too of how someone could have contracted it as well. In the UK, many papers spat out homophobic headlines around AIDS, and for many they saw this disease as a confirmation that their homophobia and judgment around other vulnerable groups, such as drug users, was correct. It was being affirmed by this disease spreading mainly in these vulnerable communities. Bisexual people were also horribly vilified for daring to be attracted to all genders, and thus having the ability to pick up the disease more likely in homosexual activity and then have the goal to pass it on to straight people. So that's where a lot of bisexual vilification, which still happens to this day as well, was developing as well. That was in the 90s really that was being talked about as if it was just a hot topic there in different tabloids, mainly in America, I think it was, and yeah, it was terrible for morale as well. Whole gay communities were being almost entirely wiped out by the disease. It was a very lonely time following the peak of deaths for particularly homosexual people that were left over. And unfortunately, from this negative view of HIV positive people, it can lead to a dissuasion of sorts of getting tested for one's own and their partner's safety, so that they're not viewed differently by friends or colleagues if they were to test positive. And of course, that then has a knock-on effect where these people not receiving treatments, of course, can lead it to be converted into AIDS there, to worsen, of course, and develop that syndrome, and also potentially pass on the disease without knowing. As many as 1 million straight people in the UK believe that they cannot contract HIV because they are straight, whilst 21% of straight people don't bother testing for HIV because they think they're unlikely to get it too for the same reason. This belief is extremely dangerous now because since 2022, straight people make up more of the transmission of new cases for HIV, so at 49%, than gay and bisexual men at 45%. So it really does need to be contested, that belief, because it's going to be extremely dangerous for straight populations there. Again, considering that new transmissions are already higher in straight people because they're not taking the precautions compared to gay and bisexual people or trans people as well to an extent, or drug users through need or exchange programs. And it's leading a lot of straight people to be vulnerable. So these stigmas really do need to be combated. And for these reasons, it is still very important to have World AIDS Day. So I thank everyone for watching this video. I hope you have learned something new. Be sure to leave a comment maybe about your experiences or anything else that you've learned that I've not talked about on this video there, so we can continue to educate each other and ultimately stay safe and tackle these stigmas. Please do seek resources such as the Terence Higgins Trust in the UK to help educate yourself on HIV if you were living with the disease or a family member or friend was living with HIV, and thank you for watching as well.